The axe came down on a boy's neck, and the crowd gasped as Conradin's severed head hit the scaffold with a thud. Blood splattered across the wood, soaking the soil of Naples' marketplace. He wasn't just any condemned man. He was the last heir of the mighty Hohenstaufen dynasty. At only 16, Conradin's execution was staged as a grotesque public spectacle, a savage message carved in flesh and blood that stunned all of Europe. Sure, rivals for a throne were often imprisoned, ransomed, or exiled, but they weren't typically put on a scaffold for public entertainment, especially not a boy who was a king by birthright. This execution was different. This was a message written in blood, designed to wipe a legacy off the map for good. This is the story of Conradin's final moments and how the last heir of such a powerful dynasty ended up condemned to a fate so brutal and unprecedented it would echo for centuries. So, how did we get here? To understand the bloody end, you have to go back to the poisoned beginning. Conradin was born in 1252, not into a stable empire, but into its smoldering ruins. His grandfather was the legendary Emperor Frederick II, a man so brilliant and controversial he was called Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. Frederick's life was basically a two-front war, a struggle to unite his German and Sicilian lands, and a bitter existential conflict against the papacy. This was the era of the Guelphs and Ghibellines, the Guelphs backing the Pope, the Ghibellines backing the Emperor. This rivalry had torn Italy apart for generations, and the popes feared nothing more than being surrounded by a single Hohenstaufen superpower. They saw the dynasty as a threat that had to be exterminated. Conradin's father, Conrad IV, inherited the fight but not his father's long life. He died when Conradin was just 2, leaving the boy an orphan king. Suddenly, Conradin was the Duke of Swabia, the King of Jerusalem, and the rightful King of Sicily. But these were just titles. He was a king without a kingdom, growing up in his uncle's court in Bavaria, a pawn in a massive political chess match. While he was learning Latin and being described by writers of the time as beautiful as Absalom, his inheritance was being carved up. In Sicily, his own uncle Manfred, an illegitimate son of Frederick II, seized the throne, spreading rumors that Conradin was dead. And in Rome, a new French pope, Clement IV, saw his chance to be rid of the Hohenstaufen for good. He excommunicated Manfred and invited a famously ruthless French prince, Charles of Anjou, to invade Italy and take Sicily for himself. The Pope offered Charles a crown, blessed by God himself. Charles was to be the Pope's champion, his brutal instrument to finally end the Hohenstaufen problem. In 1266, at the Battle of Benevento, Charles's veteran French knights crushed Manfred's army, killing Manfred in the process. The Pope's champion had won. The Hohenstaufen line seemed broken, but everyone had forgotten about the boy in Bavaria. When news of Manfred's death reached Germany, the Ghibelline loyalists, Italian cities and nobles who had stood with the emperors, saw one last hope. They sent envoys to Bavaria, begging the now teenage Conradin to come and reclaim his birthright. They promised him money, men, and the support of the people of Rome, who already despised the French occupation. For Conradin, this was it, the moment his entire life had been building towards. He was only 14, but in the medieval world, that was old enough to lead an army. He was the grandson of Frederick II. To refuse meant letting his family's legacy die quietly in a German forest. To accept was a massive gamble. He pledged his own lands to raise money, gathered an army, and in 1267 crossed the Alps into Italy. At first, his campaign was a stunning success. Cities chafing under French rule threw their gates open. Pavia, Siena, and Pisa hailed him as a liberator. His forces swelled. He then marched into Rome itself, not as a conqueror, but as a returning hero. The people loved him, calling him a new Caesar. The Pope and his cardinals left the city, a clear sign of how seriously they took the threat. For a brief, glorious moment, it looked like the Hohenstaufen eagle was soaring again. Conradin, full of youthful confidence, thought victory was just around the corner. But his opponent, Charles of Anjou, wasn't a romantic. He was a cold, calculating veteran. He knew this war wouldn't be won with cheering crowds, but with cold steel. The two armies finally met on August 23, 1268, at the Battle of Tagliacozzo. Conradin's army was bigger, and their first charge was ferocious. They smashed into Charles's front line, which seemed to break and run. They even captured the royal banner and killed a man they thought was Charles of Anjou himself. Believing the battle was won, Conradin's army broke formation. Some gave chase, others started looting the enemy camp. It was a trap, a devastatingly clever one. The man they'd killed was a decoy. Charles himself was waiting with a hidden reserve of 800 of his most elite knights behind a hill. As chaos erupted in Conradin's ranks, he sprung the trap. The fresh, disciplined knights crashed into the scattered, unprepared Ghibelline army. The surprise was total. The result was a massacre. Conradin's dream turned into a nightmare. He and his best friend, Frederick of Baden, barely escaped the slaughter and fled toward Rome. Their flight was desperate. Finding no safety in Rome, Conradin headed for the coast at Astura, hoping to sail to Sicily. But betrayal was waiting. He was captured by the local Frangipani family and, in a final indignity, sold to Charles of Anjou. The boy king was now a prisoner in Naples' ominous Castel dell'Ovo, the Castle of the Egg. For Charles, the choice was simple, and it was summed up in a chilling phrase: Vita Corradini, mors Caroli, mors Corradini, vita Caroli. The life of Conradin is the death of Charles. The death of Conradin is the life of Charles. As long as Conradin was alive, he was a symbol. Charles needed a permanent solution. He set up a show trial. Conradin was charged with treason for invading his own kingdom. The verdict was never in doubt. When the death sentence was brought to his cell, it said that he and his friend Frederick were in the middle of a game of chess. They heard the news, didn't flinch, and simply finished their game. On October 29th, a scaffold was built in the Piazza del Mercato, Naples' main market square, to ensure the biggest possible crowd. This was political theater. Charles of Anjou himself watched from a balcony. Charles granted Conradin one small mercy. He would die first. The 16-year-old mounted the scaffold with defiant dignity. He declared his innocence, and then, legend says that in a final defiant act, he threw one of his gloves down into the crowd. It wasn't a gesture of surrender, but of passing on his claim. The glove was supposedly retrieved and delivered to the royal house of Aragon, who would later use that very claim to challenge Charles. His last words were reportedly a cry of grief. "O mother, what grief I cause you." Then the blade fell. What happened next is a detail steeped in legend, but it speaks to the horror of the moment. According to some chronicles, his best friend, Frederick of Baden, was brought forward, picked up Conradin's severed head, and kissed it in a heartbreaking farewell. Then he, too, was beheaded, along with a dozen other Ghibelline leaders. Another legend, born from the shock of the day, claimed that as Conradin's blood soaked the scaffold, a great eagle swooped down from the sky, dipped its wing in the royal blood, and soared away, a divine protest of an earthly crime. The direct male line of the House of Hohenstaufen was now extinct. Charles had won. Or so he thought. The public slaughter of a 16-year-old boy, a king by birthright, sent a shockwave of revulsion across Europe. This wasn't seen as justice. It was seen as murder. In a heartbeat, Conradin was transformed from a condemned traitor into a martyr for the imperial cause. In Germany, the outrage fostered a deep resentment against the French and the papacy that would linger for centuries. Centuries later, his story was even used as propaganda during the Protestant Reformation, with woodcuts showing the Pope himself beheading the young king. The hatred Charles had sown that day in Naples grew deep roots. 14 years later, in 1282, it exploded in Sicily in a bloody, island-wide rebellion known as the Sicilian Vespers. The rebel cry was "Death to the French," and thousands of Charles's men were slaughtered. The Sicilians then offered their crown to the House of Aragon, the very family that had supposedly received Conradin's glove. Charles of Anjou, the man who killed a boy to secure a kingdom, would live to see half of it torn from his grasp, a bloody harvest from the seeds of brutality he had planted. Conradin's body was eventually moved to the church of Santa Maria del Carmine, founded by his mother near the execution site. There his remains lie today, beside his faithful friend Frederick. A statue marks their tomb, a monument to the boy king whose tragic end marked not just the fall of a dynasty, but the dawn of a new, more ruthless age of politics. The story of Conradin is a brutal reminder that in the high-stakes game of thrones, innocence is often the first casualty. His execution was a calculated act of terror meant to signal an end, but instead, it created a legend that would outlive his executioner. If you find these forgotten corners of history as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join us for our next journey into the past.